What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We have a fantastic episode lined up for you today ahead of our travels out to San Francisco and Santa Clara for Super Bowl 60 between the New England Patriots and the Seattle Seahawks. We'll have all kinds of coverage on this specific matchup between the Patriots offense and the Seahawks defense, one of the best defensive units in football. And to give us even more insight into the challenge the Patriots will be faced with in the Super Bowl, we're bringing in our good friend, Dante Scarnecchia. Five-time Super Bowl champion Dante Scarnecchia, one of the greatest offensive line coaches of all time. We're talking technique up front, how the Patriots might be able to handle some of the things they'll see from Seattle, the communication required to handle Seattle's games and stunts that Mike McDonald will call for that defense. It's a great, great conversation. But before we get to Dante, we're going to talk about the right shoulder on everybody's mind. Yes, Drake Maye's right shoulder is not 100%. He's been limited in practice this week, but I just wanted to quickly pass along things that I have heard from people behind the scenes within the Patriots organization, and that is that they are not all that worried about this injury impacting Drake Maye significantly in the Super Bowl. Of course, his availability, not in question. He's going to play. But when it's a right shoulder, it's the quarterback of a Super Bowl team, when it's potentially the MVP of the league, it's worthy of keeping an eye on. And so let's continue to keep an eye on it. What's his participation level in practice here in New England when they travel out west? It'll be interesting during Super Bowl week. There'll be a pool reporter who actually gets to watch the duration of practice. And so we may get some pretty good insight into just how much Drake Maye is participating in those practices ahead of this matchup with the Seahawks. But right now, as it stands, yes, he's limited in practice. People within the organization not all that concerned, which echoes that which Mike Vrabel said at the podium this week when he was asked if he was worried about this injury impacting his star quarterback before the biggest game of their lives. So how can the Patriots protect Drake Maye? How can they ensure that nothing further happens to that right shoulder in Super Bowl 60? It all starts in the trenches. It all starts with the Patriots offensive line, and nobody better to talk about offensive line than with Dante Scarnecchia. Here's our conversation with Scar. All right, there he is, the great Dante Scarnecchia. Dante, thanks for being with us again here on Next Pats ahead of the Super Bowl. Can you believe it? Just about a week away for the Patriots to be back chasing another Lombardi trophy here.
I am so really happy for so many people. Of course, you know, what they've been able to get done within the football staff and the team and all that. But you know, I just always remembered the people that are on the sidelines that, you know, that do all the stuff. And Mike mentioned them the other day when they got back, the snow was off all their cars and the people in the building, and everyone shares in it. And a lot of people get to go to the Super Bowl, and I think that's a wonderful thing for them, because certainly when this whole thing started out this year, that was probably way in the back. And, you know, it may be something to think about, maybe something to dream about. And as the season went on, it got bigger and bigger. And now here you are, and everyone's going to Santa Clara. And I think that's a fantastic thing.
It really is unbelievable, given where their expectations were from everybody outside the building, at least, before the season began. For you, Dante, as somebody who has been to so many of these, what did you find to be the biggest challenge? It's obviously a different kind of week once you actually get there. The preparation, 2 weeks before, I'm sure, is a little bit different in some ways. What was the biggest challenge as far as you're concerned?
I think there are a lot of similarities between the regular season and the postseason, but the Super Bowl's beyond all that, because you have 2 weeks. And this first week, it's really just trying to get everybody healthy, give them some information, but not all the information, because you really don't have it yet. And as a coaching staff, and then you go next week and you say, well, that's your regular week, but the problem is it's not a regular week, because now your families are there, and your schedule's so much different. The media demands so much of your time, and it's just different. And I love it. We all loved it. but it's not the same as the regular season games.
And now, the offensive line is going to be under a microscope, I'm sure, this week, as it really has been throughout the course of this postseason. They've seen some great defensive fronts and pass rush units specifically, and they'll see another one against Seattle when they take them on in the Super Bowl. And first, before I kind of look ahead and ask you about some technique things and some of the things that we love to ask you on this podcast that our listeners love hearing from you, Dante, I want you to look back, and I'm sure you watched the AFC title game, and I'm sure you had an eye on Will Campbell, and I'm just curious how you thought he performed in that game, because, the layman here, I felt as though it was a better performance from the rookie left tackle in that AFC title game than maybe the previous couple of weeks where he had some difficult matchups.
Yeah, I watch all those guys. That's because what I've done for so long, and my eyes automatically go to them when it all starts. And for us, unfortunately, that came from a hotel room in Charlotte where we got stuck for 2 days. Coming back from Florida, we were down there to see our grandkids, and spent 2 days in a hotel watching the games. And my wife, I thought she was going to go nuts, because I just sat there. We laid. All you could do is just lay on the bed and watch the games for 2 days. Couldn't go outside. It was miserable. So yes, to your point, to your question, of course, I watch those guys, and there's a lot of good things that are happening, and there's some things they need to work on and get better at. And yeah, I watch Will and see how he's doing against the edge guys, and for the most part, he did all right. And I'm sure there's some things he'd like to do better.
Now, one thing that Seattle, Dante, will do, my understanding is, up front, they like to use games and stunts, and they'll twist those defensive linemen. And not only will they do it with their front defensive linemen, but they'll use the linebackers as parts of those games as well. And so for this Patriots offensive line, what's required in order for those guys to be able to work together to pick up that kind of movement up front?
Well, I think what you just described isn't like it just started happening, last week. This stuff's been going on for years and years. And it usually comes into play that when the line's responsible for, as an example, 4 down linemen and another linebacker, and that guy, is part of it. He walks up into a gap, and all of a sudden what normally would be a 2-man stunt between the tackle and end, all of a sudden now becomes a 3-man stunt between the linebacker, the tackle, and the end coming all the way inside. So, this just didn't get invented. It's been going on, and they've seen it all year long, and they are challenging. There's no doubt about it. It's the stuff that people are doing. It's all designed to make things as hard as they possibly can on those linemen. And they got to work hard at blocking them, and they got to practice against it all the time. And you can't stick your head in the sand and say it ain't going to happen, because it's going to happen. Everyone's doing it, and that will certainly be the case next week.
Is it communication? Is it purely, how these guys are talking to each other up front before the snap, during the play? Dante, what might be the key for them?
Oh, I think that, when they know that they have this linebacker in particular, so it's the center of the guard and the tackle, and they'll have some type of call that says, hey, look, we got these 3, okay? Or you may have those 3 plus 1, because if the linebacker drops out, another guy comes, they got to get him. It's all that comes into play, but they'll do their homework, and they'll see out of what fronts these things happen and how they happen. And the key to it all is doing a great job of working together, hitting those guys that are rushing, and not letting them have those angles where they can pick and not allow line stunts in particular, to be passed inside. And that's what they're trying to do, is pass off the stunts so they get all 3 of those guys covered up. So it's a challenge, but that's a challenge you get faced with every week, and not only in pro football, in college football as well.
And again, Seattle, really not a heavy blitz team. They're at a 13% blitz rate, which is pretty low this postseason with Mike Macdonald. So they do move those guys up front, though, to try to generate pressure and create some confusion. It actually could be a factor on both sides of the ball. It looks like, according to some of the numbers, that the Seattle offensive line hasn't necessarily done a tremendous job at picking up some of these games and stunts up front. So maybe you see some of that stuff from the Patriots as well. Dante, I want to talk to you a little bit about the run game, because I guess the way this defense is structured in Seattle, talking to one NFC offensive coordinator who's had to prepare for these guys, they are so talented up front that they're pretty good at stopping the run with just 4 down linemen. And the way he explained it is that allows them to do all sorts of stuff in the secondary, makes it really hard to throw on them, but because they're so talented up front that they can stop the run with just 4. When you saw that as an offensive line coach, is that almost a challenge to your group up front to say, hey, we've got to be able to move these bodies? If they're not going to throw numbers at the line of scrimmage, we have to win some matchups here in order to move the ball on the ground.
No, there's no doubt about it. And a lot of times, those involve single blocks, but a lot of times in this day and age, there's a lot of double teams going on in the offensive line. And I think that when you put 2 offensive linemen on one defensive lineman, and you just don't have that guy, you got that guy plus a linebacker. So you move that guy as far as you can off the ball until the linebacker determines which of the 2 blockers has to block him. So it's not just single blocks, it's double teams, it's zone blocks, it's those types of things that all come into play. And I think, it really comes down to technique. And our pads got to be lower than their pads so we can get up underneath them to move them, and then account for the linebackers that we're working to in the process. So having said all that, I think they do a great job, and they have some experienced guys that have done it a long time there, and they're very well coached. Mike Macdonald's made his reputation as a defensive coordinator, and it looks to me, when you watch it from TV, it looks like he's calling a lot of the defenses. So if that's the case, then therein lies the challenge. And I think it's a great challenge. And he came from Baltimore, correct?
He did. Yep.
Coach McDonald. Yeah, I mean, they've seen the scheme. They've coached against the scheme. They've played against the scheme, some of them. And so they know what to expect. And I think, it's just, that's what they're all getting ready for, is looking at the guys, how well they do things. They've played against a lot of these guys, at other teams, and I think that they've had experience with them. So you go out there and you prepare for 2 weeks, and then you got to go out and play the best football you've played all season.
I have one more technique question, Dante, and then sort of a big picture one for you. But this is something that Patriots fans might see on Super Bowl Sunday. They have some great interior defensive linemen. Leonard Williams is sort of the big name. They have another player, Byron Murphy, who's a little bit younger player, but has been fantastic at defending the run. And one thing that he'll do is he'll get down on a knee, Dante, to take on a double team, to be able to sort of hold his ground, and then he'll still be able to get off of those blocks at times and make plays. But I find that technique on his end interesting, because I don't feel like I see that all the time, although I'm sure there are others who do it. When a player does that as an offensive line group, is there a way to attack that? Do you have to get lower than the lowest in this case, because he is getting so far down there where he's almost on the ground, to just be able to sustain? Is there anything that the offensive line can do to sort of combat that?
I think it still comes down to pads lower than their pads, and dropping the knee has been something that's gone on since, they started playing. They pumped air into the football. That Romeo Crennel, that was a big thing he always taught the defensive linemen to do, is drop the knee to the double team side and get yourself lower than they are, so that you don't get moved off the line of scrimmage. And I think it's, what you just described and all that, it's something that does happen a lot. And some players do it really well and some players don't. And some players, just it's not part of the repertoire. So got to get up underneath a guy like that and do the best you can of moving him. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult for the defensive lineman because there's a lot of times these zone blocks look like double teams when they're not meant to. And all of a sudden now he's dropping a need against a zone block, and that's not what you want if you're playing defensive line. So there's good and there's bad with all of it. And I think the most important thing is the guy. Like Murphy is a really good defensive lineman, and Leonard Williams is a really good defensive lineman. And you got to understand that these are guys, you better have your hats in the right places and your hat in the right place, your hands in the right places, and use every tool you got in your box to block these guys.
Last thing I wanted to ask you, Dante, just knowing Mike Vrabel the way you do, and you guys going into the Patriots Hall of Fame together, and I know you've been following along all season this season. What is it about Mike that you think will allow him to have his team ready for the biggest game of their lives?
Well, I think he's had his team ready for now 20 games, is it? Have they played 20 games? Mm-hmm. And I think it won't be a whole lot different this time. They've had a 17-game season. They played in 3 playoff games against 3 really good teams. And, he hadn't disappointed us yet. So he'll have them ready to go. I think the team will work very hard this week and next week to be ready to go. And those other guys over there, they're getting paid too. And so this is the biggest game of all their lives. And you gotta put everything you got into what's going to happen a week from Sunday in Santa Clara. And I would submit that, Mike's doing that and the staff's doing that. And they're going to go out and do what they've done for all these weeks and put the best product they can out there and do everything they can during the game to adjust and to do the things necessary to win the game. That's what they're going to do, and hopefully it'll work out.
He is the great Dante Scarnecchia. Dante, thank you so much for being with us again on Next Pats. It's always fun to talk some football with you, especially ahead of the Super Bowl. Thanks again. Thanks,
Phil, and good luck. And I know it's a working week for you, but go out there and enjoy the experience because it's a hell of an experience. It's a hell of an experience, man.
It is. Thank you, my friend. We're going to launch right into our Who's Next segment. And typically, this is where we tell you about what to expect in the draft, but not this week. This week, Who's Next are the Seattle Seahawks, and specifically their defense. Yes, we'll give you a little taste of what to expect from the Seahawks offense when we dig into our mailbag, but let's dig into this Patriots offense versus Seahawks defense matchup, and I was able to do that via a conversation with an NFC offensive coordinator who is very familiar with this Seahawks defense, and according to him, this is the best defense in football, and it's not particularly close. He would acknowledge that maybe the most talented defense in football is the Houston Texans, but Seattle's talent, according to him, not all that far off in the scheme in which they play. Coached up by Mike McDonald, makes them that much more dangerous. Now, what is it about that scheme that makes them so difficult? Here's what the offensive coordinator had to say. He says they, quote, start out by beating the bleep out of you in 4 down quarters. So just as an aside, 4 down linemen, quarters coverage on the back end, usually some sort of shell look with 2 high safeties. The OC goes on to say, the way that front is built, as talented as they are, they can do it. You can't push the ball down the field, you can't hold on to it, and you can't run it. Their interior defensive line is elite. And so that starts with Leonard Williams. All-pro this season, one of the best, if not the best, interior offensive lineman in football. And usually right there alongside Williams is a younger player, but very talented in his own right, Byron Murphy, one of the best run-stuffing tackles in the NFL. So the fact that they are as gifted as they are with those 4 down linemen, DeMarcus Lawrence, a big part of what they're doing as well. You remember him from his days with the Cowboys. They can stop the run just with that front 4, and that allows them to dedicate numbers to the secondary. It's really hard to play the run out of quarters, but the Seahawks dare you to run the football while they're in that quarters coverage, and they trust their defensive linemen to handle their gig up front so that it makes it impossible for the offense on the other side of the line. That's what this offensive coordinator really wanted to highlight to me. He says, quote, to play quarters and live in it, you have to be elite to be able to stop the run when you're a gap short. You have to be stout inside and on the edge. It's really hard to play the run out of quarters. Even if they get gashed on the ground, they'll say, okay, we'll heat you up, and we'll let our corners play one-on-one and single high, or we'll heavy pressure you, and we'll get you out of that passing game world. They can get you out of both. Then on third down, they can be multiple and make life a living hell. This is the challenge for Josh McDaniels, and probably the first domino that has to fall. Can you run against their 4-down looks when they are dedicating numbers to the pass game? Because if you can, then you force Seattle to bring another body into the box. Then you're creating one-on-ones on the outside, and Mike Macdonald will allow his corners to live on an island on the outside. You just have to beat them. And the Rams were able to do that. Remember, in the NFC title game, they ran them out of those quarters looks. They averaged 5.2 yards per carry in that game. That's step one. Then you get one-on-ones on the outside. The Rams have incredibly talented receivers. Not sure if you've heard of them, Puka Nacua and Davante Adams. So they were able to win their one-on-ones, and they were able to gash the Seahawks down the field. The question is, can the Patriots do the same? They don't have a Puka Nacua. They don't have a Davante Adams, but they do have a player in Kayshon Boutte who's shown that he can beat elite talent on the outside. We just saw him beat Derek Stingley of Houston down the sideline for a deep touchdown a couple of weeks ago. So it is possible for the Patriots to generate some run with Ramondre Stevenson and be able to move the ball that way. Then maybe they can get their receivers in one-on-one situations on the outside. And then maybe if Drake Maye is throwing the deep ball the way he did for the vast majority of the regular season, now you've got your explosive plays. The Patriots defense does their job. Maybe it's a low-scoring game. You only need a couple of those down-the-field targets, and this is potentially another Super Bowl for New England. Now let's dig into our mailbag, and let's get to this question from Andrew. It's a great one. What did Brian Flores do in the Vikings-Seahawks game earlier this year to hold Jackson Smith-Njigba to only 23 yards receiving on 2 catches? This is a great question by Andrew. This is a Week 13 game between Seattle and Minnesota. Now, the Seahawks won this one 26-0. So let's take that into account when we're talking about passing game numbers for Sam Darnold and receiving numbers for Jackson Smith-Njigba. The Seahawks are going up against a backup quarterback. The Vikings couldn't move the ball, not necessarily a huge passing kind of situation for Seattle to find itself in. However, Sam Darnold went just 14 for 26 in that game for 128 yards. That's a 4.9 average. He was sacked 4 times. He had a QBR of 23.3 and a quarterback rating of 67.5. So pass game heavy plan or not a good performance from Sam Darnold. And as Andrew mentioned, you had Jackson Smith-Njigba with just 2 catches for 23 yards on 4 targets. How did they do it? Really interesting game plan from Brian Flores, which included obvious doubles on Jackson Smith-Njigba, where you had people dropping underneath him and you had a body over the top. On shorter plays, you had clear doubles with safety help over the top for cornerbacks on some potential deep shots to Jackson Smith-Njigba. But I really found it interesting what the Vikings did up front to make sure that Sam Darnold didn't have the time to find his best receiver, especially down the field. They blitzed on over 60% of their snaps in this game. Now, this is already a blitz-heavy team with Brian Flores. We all know that. But over 60% of the time to be sending extra rushers is mind-boggling. And Sam Darnold's numbers reflect that he was impacted by the rush. His average depth of target in that game was 3.6. That's incredibly low to have your passes traveling just that far beyond the line of scrimmage. You can't hit Jackson Smith-Njigba deep when you're throwing 3 yards beyond the line on a play-to-play basis. So a great plan from Brian Flores obviously did not yield a win for the Vikings in this game, but it's a plan that I think Mike Vrabel, Zach Core, Patriots defensive play caller, they can pull from, and we know the Patriots have gone blitz happy over the course of this postseason. They've become much more aggressive in that regard. So do they dial it up to an even greater degree in the biggest game of the year to take away that which Sam Darnold and Jackson Smith-Njigba do really, really well? This can be an incredibly explosive offense. They love play action, but if you can, even on first and second down, send extra blitzers and say, we'll dare you to try to hit a deep play action shot on us. We're actually going to get home before you even have time to find your great receiver down the field on those play action shots or on third down. Similar sort of concept. Now, this is a West Coast offense, and so not always the most efficient, pure drop back pass game in obvious third down situations. But if you can heat him up, Sam Darnold, he has at times melted even this year, and it's been such a great year for him, but he was 28th in the NFL in EPA per dropback when under pressure. That's out of just 33 quarterbacks in the league. So if you can bother Sam Darnold, if you can blitz him, get the football out of his hands quickly, that won't only limit what he can do behind center, but it might limit what the best receiver in football arguably can do in Jackson Smith-Njigba. All right, that's it for this edition of the Next Pats podcast. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much to the great Dante Scarnecchia for being with us and sharing some of his football insight and his insight in terms of what's going to happen in this matchup in Super Bowl 60. A great job by him. As always, we'll be talking to you next time from Santa Clara. So make sure you're tuning in, not only to Next Pats, but the Patriots Talk podcast as well. Early edition, Boston Sports Tonight. All of our 6 o'clock kickoff shows during the week. We'll even be on NBC 10 Boston, so find us there. It's going to be a great, great week. We're going to have so much content coming at you. Make sure you're following it all. We'll talk to you very, very soon.